What we are up against at the moment as the doctor community as well as the pharmaceutical community, I would say, is really the coverage in the media and the call for greater transparency. So there is more scrutiny demanded, and there is also rumors that company contributions can actually influence decisions of doctors. And I think this is something we should very carefully take into consideration as to whether or not we should just limit our debate really strictly to transparency and talking about transparency as such, or whether we should open up the debate again, and Richard was very much against it in the beginning, about conflict of interest. It's not about the doctor being bought by for the price of a sandwich and to give a certain prescription, but it's a broader debate, and we need to embed this into the debate about trust in general, about corruption, about perceptions of corruption, because many people in the public, also in the media, are not quite sure whether or not when we speak about transparency, this is about corruption, about preventing corruption, or whether this is about ethics as such, which I think it should be. So what we are seeing at the moment is an increased public suspicion and scrutiny we're up against. We're seeing a greater pressure for transparency, but we also do not yet have any evidence-based standard for assessing potential risks of undue influence or bias. And this is what it's all about, and this is also why, as Paweł rightly said, the physicians are quite anxious. They don't want to be perceived as being bribed into certain decisions. And so this is why they are sometimes insecure as to what level of detail they should be disclosing when they submit a disclosure form, for instance, and when this is going into the public domain. We see more mandatory and self-regulatory disclosure at the same time. So while, for instance, the European Commission says it's fine for you to go with a self-regulatory approach, we also see at several country levels mandatory disclosure, and there is also concern in the physician community that these different disclosure settings may conflict with each other, and there is a fear that there may not be enough consistency amongst those platforms. There's an emerging cacophony of COI disclosure, a term that was phrased or coined by our sister society, ASCO, in the United States. So there's also concern that we're sending out conflicting messages at the moment as to what each of us understands should be disclosed, should be made transparent, and what not. And there is a great variety of risk perceptions. So each individual doctor, actually some doctors call us up at ESMO asking, well, I have to complete this declaration of interest form. What level of detail do you expect me to disclose this with? And there is a call for there are calls for harmonization, but no single process or common framework is in sight. Even the European Court of Auditors, actually the highest authority also auditing the agencies across the European Union, says we do not foresee any such framework happen at a European Union level. So should we just go with the national level? Should we try to harmonize something still at the European level and get this mutual dialogue, which we very much appreciate, between industry and the physician communities going? And how many societies, how many umbrella organizations should be at the table? How many industry umbrella associations should be there? And should we also invite in other parties to participate in the discussion? We've already seen this survey that was introduced by Maggie before. So there is an approval rate, I would say, of up to 80% of doctors saying, of course, we're happy with transparency, but frankly, who would oppose the idea of transparency? It would be like committing suicide in public, wouldn't it? So from a patient point of view, patients actually, when it comes to medical research, they're not so much concerned actually about doctor-industry relationships. They rather see progress happening, so they really insist on getting new drugs to market and soon, and getting a cure in view. And also from a perspective of patients dealing with their doctors, they would see, obviously, they would like to see potential conflicts of interest disclosed. But there is a controversy in the patient community about how this should be disclosed, because it would be quite awkward in a patient-physician encounter to have this discussion. You know, me as a doctor, I have to confess I received this amount of money from that company, this amount of money from the other company. This would really put a different slant on the doctor-patient communication. So patients usually would vote for either external disclosure or a written disclosure, and then perhaps after the doctor encounter have more time to make a proper assessment about the treatment plan. So this is also a major concern for the physicians. How do we deal with this in our daily practice when we see our patients? As a doctor, as a medical doctor, you have to disclose a lot of things actually, and each different party, for instance, the European Medicines Agency, or when you want to publish an article in Annals of Oncology, for instance, or when you want to disclose or have to disclose your conflicts of interest with the European Union of Medical Specialists to get CME credits, you have to complete different forms, and each of them requires a different amount of disclosures and detail. So this is also a bit of a headache, actually, frankly, for the physician community, and we have to address that as well, I think. Then some medical associations also put their own disclosures on their website, so you can click on there. It's already in the public domain, and the question is really, will this also then be reflected in an EFPIA public disclosure, for instance? So that's an example, another example of self-disclosures. Then we have industry disclosures already ongoing, for instance, in France, mandatorily. They put this information up there, each company does that, and you can easily compare, and as an investigative journalist you will readily do this, compare the different disclosures, and if you find something that is not consistent, you will immediately jump at this and say, here I have something that's good news for my audience, for my readers. So this is the industry disclosure form proposed by EFPIA, and also there it remains to be seen how this can be one-to-one, be implemented at the national level. We've also heard from the Netherlands, for instance, there's a different threshold maybe that will be upheld, I understand. So there's also some concern as to whether or not there will be consistency throughout Europe through this system. Then we see the third parties also jumping on board, like the Dollars for Docs website, really putting the doctors on the spot, saying we have data, 2.1 million data sets gathered about the doctors in the United States, and this is also something that is not just limited to the United States. There are also European doctors already on this, so there's also some concern, will this match, will there be some issues here that may not be too convenient? Then there is the current discussion in the United States under the Sunshine Act, the Medicare, the CMS authorities. They have already started putting in the public domain huge files of data on more than 800,000 physicians in the United States, receiving payments from this. It's an insurance program, basically a federal insurance program. And there's concern, obviously, whether or not this will be cross-matchable with all the other data that is already out there. There has been an outcry in the United States. This is incomprehensible, this is outrageous, but the media immediately jumped on that, took that up. For instance, the New York Times, they use the data now to set up their own platform, so to speak, a searchable platform where you just enter the doctor's name and you get the data immediately onto your mobile phone in front of the doctor's practice, and you say, hey doctor, I just saw this, so are you bribed by anybody, or what's the issue here? So there's also some uncomfortable feelings, understandably so, with the doctor community, whether or not this will be common practice in Europe as well. And for instance, our sister society, they issued a deep concern, actually, press release saying, we are not happy about this. This should have been consulted with the doctor community first, in the first place. It is inaccurate, it is incomplete, and it is completely unfair to publish this kind of information without giving proper explanation and without giving any context. So what we see also from the European Commission is quite refreshing in terms of we should not necessarily follow everything that comes to us from the United States. The United States usually pride themselves in saying we are at least 5 years ahead of what is going on in the European Union, but to some extent we would say, or we would tend to say, it's not that bad sometimes to be behind it, because then you can learn from some of the mistakes made across the pond and maybe take some precautionary measures so that we as doctors are not put on the spot without giving the proper context, without giving any substantial reason. And what the European Commission is saying basically, doctor-industry relationships is fine. It is appropriate. There's a saying in the doctor community, if you do not have a conflict of interest, you're not an expert. We have to have this dialogue. And in order to be an expert, you have to be in almost daily contact, I would say, with industry representatives in terms of clinical trials, in terms of other issues. So this dialogue is perfectly fine. Only when improper marketing comes into play, this is where the tricky part begins, and this is where we have to take some steps. But again, the European Commission does not say all this has to be regulated on a mandatory basis. They say self-regulation is perfectly fine, and they also understand that it will be impossible for the foreseeable future to impose any sort of framework, regulatory framework across the European Union to regulate this. What we say as ESMO is usually the patient perception is very important for us when it comes to the impact on healthcare professionals. Our independence is something we would like to safeguard. There may be personal repercussions, there may be accuracy issues. The tax authorities may jump on this and challenge doctors actually based on their tax records. The press will jump on this. There is a limit of acceptance of industry support possibly with some physicians because they say this is all too dangerous for me, I will take a step back. But obviously this is counterproductive because this is not the way we should go in terms of innovation. This is a step backward, and we should try to, through common dialogue, we should try to prevent that from happening. And then they may look for low-cost CME offers. There are plenty, obviously, but many of them may be not up to standard and may not be good quality. When it comes to ESMO as a healthcare organization, it's the same issues. It's the patient perception, it's the independence of the profession. We may look differently at future business opportunities. The press will be jumping on this. The robustness of the leadership disclosures may have to be revised. We don't know. Maybe we have to be more restrictive in the future, which we do not want to be for the time being. And this will probably also have an impact on Congress attendance. We're already seeing this in the United States, and partners in the United States are already saying the Europeans are beating us hands down because they are 5 years behind us. So in summary, what we are seeing at the moment is we want to be able as the physician community to manage our patient perspective, but we do not know yet which are the best practices to do this. In terms of assessing the relevance and the significance and the proportionality of the issues, and also communicating them in a proper fashion. And there comes psychological issues also into play, like strategic exaggeration, moral licensing, the panhandler effect, meaning patients having to accept distrusted advice because they feel uncomfortable challenging the doctor in the patient encounter. We have a lack of public understanding of the value of our mutual relationships, doctor and industry, and we need to better communicate the mutual value. We could also address, obviously, the mutual rubbing off of reputation, and I'm sure we will have that discussion later on. And we have a lack of context of value of transfers, so the context should also be taken into consideration. There should be some discussion about what is okay, what is probably not okay, and this should be in the public. There's an accuracy issue with the data that is provided. The data protection issue was alluded to earlier, and the data review obviously needs to be enabled for the physician community before the data goes public. And as you've seen in the United States, this is obviously not good when this is published without any consent. Consistency of information across the various platforms, I mentioned that earlier. Is there any way to cross-check this? What is the administrative burden of doing this? Who will take this on board? The timing issue, the overlapping declaration of interest timeframes. Some ask for 5 years, like the EMA. Others ask for just 2 years. Others do it on an annual basis. So how do we handle this? The communication of new requirements to professionals and patients. This is something we as ESMO want to take on board, so we will definitely be doing this. We're currently getting our arms around the declaration issue, around the conflict of conflict of interest issue. We are developing a position paper, I may say, and this will be coming forward soon. They will be doing ESMO member education, there's no doubt, and other societies will probably be doing this as well. And we're also considering, obviously, like everybody else, new potential models, business models of cooperation, like multi-sponsor, foundation-based, or virtual meetings, obviously, to tackle this issue. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.